big ideas about how to develop software and ways to build software, and then you're going to jump into Ruby, this new exciting programming language, or not new, but new to a lot of us. Well, traditionally, the first thing that we did developing software, we call the plan and document process. And so remember from the last couple of segments that there was this infamy that you could gain by building software. It's the greatest job in the world, except, you know, you could be made fun by your friends and neighbors. So about, 20 years building software, they asked the question, can't we make it as predictable as building a bridge, as civil engineering? Why can't software development be as dependable as civil engineering in cost and schedule and quality? And so what would you do? So software is only like 60 years old, so somebody had to invent how to do that. And this idea of bringing engineering discipline to software was coined in 1969. And that it was frustrating to people that they were starting to have these disasters. So what we call plan and document collectively, and we'll give you 3 examples of those, is before anybody starts writing code, make a plan. That's the way you would build a bridge, so that's the way you should do software. You write detailed documentation for all phases of the plan, and then you measure progress against the plan. So you start building software. And then if you're going to have to make changes in the project, you should be making changes in the plan and the documentation. So the first example of this has become known as the Waterfall process, which came out right as the term software engineering was first coined. And the idea was to have 5 explicit phases. And so rather than calling it a software development process, it's also called a life cycle. So this Waterfall software development process or life cycle. First is to write the requirements down into a specification, do the analysis and write the specification. Second phase is architectural design. The third phase is building and integrating the pieces together. Then you verify it. I remember verification is making sure it does what the spec says. And finally, you move into operations and maintenance phase. So this is the classic phases. And you complete one phase before you go to the next one. And the idea was, what they found is the earlier you found a bug, if you can find a bug in the architecture phase, it's a lot cheaper than you find it in the verification phase. And because it lasted a long time, years for building big software projects, the extensive documentation is there in part just so when new employees come in, they can get up to speed. So that's where we came its names. So that was the first software development process or life cycle. How well does it work? Well, here's something that somebody posted anonymously. And the users exclaimed with a laugh and a taunt, "It's just what we asked for, but not what we want." All right, so typically what happens is when you're dealing with customers, they don't quite know what they want. And when you build something and it starts to work, they realize that's not what they want. I don't know what we want, but that's not it. All right, so that happened in the Waterfall process. You take years, you get there, you show it to the customer, and they change their mind. Another one is from Fred Brooks, and his phrase is, throw the first implementation away, you will anyhow. So Fred Brooks is one of my personal heroes, and we'll quote him a couple of times. But he won the Nobel Prize in Computer Science and is author of a famous book in software engineering called Mythical Man Month. Basically what happens is developers, once they build the first one, then they get an idea of how it should have been implemented, and if they threw it away, they could do it again better. So kind of this is what a problem with the Waterfall lifecycle is. They would build software that customers didn't like, and then after they built it, they realized the right way to do it. That inspired the next life cycle called Spiral. And what's trying to combine is the features of Waterfall, there's still a lot of planning and documentation, with building prototypes and iterations on prototypes. So what you do is you evolve and document you evolve the documents over time every time you do an iteration. So here let's look at this drawing and help see it. So these 4 quadrants is what you go around and you build it. You start off down here, which says determine the objectives and constraints. Then the next step is you evaluate a bunch of alternatives and identify any risk to the project and figure out how to resolve them. Then the next phase is you develop and verify the prototype, do the verification, you build a prototype. You know, this is a portion of what you do, and you're showing it to customers. And then you get the feedback from that and do the next iteration. So we went kind of right here, and then you do it again and again and again. And this final prototype then is is the product that you would ship. So let's see if this works. So what's the good and the bad about Spiral? The good. The iterations involve the customer, so it's less likely when you build this thing that the customers are going to change their mind. So they'll see it as it evolves. That's a good thing. Reduces the chance of misunderstanding. Risk management, that kind of comes from the business school. You identify the risks in advance to try and avoid them. That's part of this life cycle. It's pretty easy to monitor, or it's easier to monitor the project than Waterfall, which goes through these separate phases. You're going around, you kind of see where you are in the second or third iteration. And your schedule and cost projections get more realistic over time. You're more familiar with it. The customer's seen it. You get an idea where you're closer to the end. The bad things are these iterations are pretty long. They could be half a year to 2 years long, which is plenty of time for customers to change their mind if it takes a year between iterations. Lots of documentation for every iteration. Every iteration, you got to write a new set of documentation. These rules that you follow, remember there's each of those 4 phases where you're not supposed to do one of the other phases until you get through the next phase, but the temptation is kind of skip steps, so it's hard for the project to stick to it. Because of all the documentation and the building of prototypes, it's pretty expensive, and it proved to be hard to meet the budget and schedule targets. All right, so that was Waterfall, Spiral. The third example, and this is another 15 years later, 15 years after Spiral and 30 years after Waterfall, is what's called the rational unified process. It's not rational because the others are irrational. Rational was the name of the company that came up with it, so rational unified process. So what you can see in this design are these phases across the top, and then they have what they called engineering requirements, skills you need across the bottom. So I'll come back to this slide, but show you again. And you can have multiple iterations within one of these phases. So there's 2 elaboration, 4 construction, and transition. So what do these phases do? The first phase, called inception, you come up with the business case for the software. This RUP model is more closely tied to business processes. So what's the business case for building it? Why should we make this investment? What will be the return on our investment? This is the time you set the schedule and the budget for the project, and you do this risk assessment of things why either the cost, the budget, or the schedule is at risk, and try and ameliorate those. The second phase is elaboration, where you develop use cases. We'll talk about what use cases are later, but it's kind of ways that the software could be used. You develop the architecture of the software, and later we will talk about the importance of architecture in building software that really works. And you build a first basic prototype. That's phase 2. Phase 3 is construction, where you do the coding and you do the testing for the product, and you actually do the first product release. And the last phase, called transition, is where you move to the real environment where the software is supposed to be running, and you get the customer to sign off on it, customer acceptance. So that's the 4 phases of RUP. The engineering disciplines that you'll need, and varies over the lifetime of it, is business modeling. This is to make the business case, doing the requirements, the analysis and design, implementation, test, and deployment. So let's go back to see how those all fit together in this slide. So here are the requirements, and you can see the business modeling plays a bigger role in the business, in the inception phase, and the beginning of the elaborations kind of dies off. Deployment is kind of the opposite profile. Deployment happens at the end, very last of the construction iterations, and the beginning of the transition phase. You can imagine deployment. Testing happens periodically with releases, a lot more of the effort in the implementation. So that your team has these skills, and you may need more of them, the different skills later. So what's the good and the bad of the RUP model? Okay. You bring in the business processes because, if you're building software, you have to have a business case for them, and that's more closely tied in. There's lots of tools. Rational was a company that was making tools for sale. It's called computer-aided software engineering case tools. These are very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars. And IBM bought Rational, so you get it from IBM now. The tools support gradual improvement of the project over time. The bad news is, it's tens of thousands of dollars for the tools, and there's no open source version. So unless you pay a Rational IBM a lot of money, you can't use the tools. There's a lot of ways to tailor it, how many phases, how many iterations, business models, so you may not use all the tools. It tends to be good only for big projects because it's, expensive, a lot of overhead. And it's up to the manager to decide how long an iteration within one of the phases be, so it's the manager's experience. And in fact, what's true about all of these projects is they expect a strong project manager. This person writes the contract that's going to win the project from the customer. He or she recruits people, new hires or people from within the company. This is the boss, so he or she is evaluating the performance of all the programmers on the team and that which affects the salary. And he or she is responsible for estimating the cost, maintaining the schedule. Again, what are the risks and how should we overcome the risks? That's all this manager's. And then they have to document all this in the management plan. And pretty much the boss gets credit if it's a success and blamed if it's over budget or late. These teams, the plan and document methods tend to get bigger primarily through expansion. And another famous thing from Fred Brooks is, from the Mythical Man Month, is adding manpower to a late project makes it later. So this is a thing he observed, right? Well, we're behind. What are we going to do? We're going to add people. That's going to make it worse. What he said is when you bring new people on board, it takes time for new people to learn the project. Also, so it takes a while for them to be useful. And then communication goes up with the number of people in the project. So the bigger the project, the more time you spend communicating, the less time there is for work. So you can scale up to bigger groups, but they tend to keep groups so that not too big so that they have not too much time in communication, and then you scale it up hierarchically.